It's the offseason, which means difficult personnel decisions are going to happen. We're going to spotlight some of those to be made in Kansas City, Seattle, and Miami today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins, and we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Joe, a lot to get into here today on the show. Happy Thursday to you. No preview shows, no games this week, no games to be played, which raise your glass, pour one out. But at the same time, really feels like this podcast can get into some of the meat and potatoes of what the show's really is supposed to be all about.
Team building across the league.
Team building across the league. Your teams every day. Yeah. The three of your teams, so 1/10 of the league, 1/11.
Oh, God. We're doing math already.
Let's do math. Well, yeah. We're going to do a lot of math.
I know. I'm nervous
today on the show, but that's okay. Kansas City's up first. We're going to do the Dolphins, the Seahawks, and the Chiefs, looking at some veteran players that are on the roster that you may, based off of play and trajectory and cost and overall team salary cap health and asset management, that you may need to make some challenging decisions with. We're starting with the Chiefs because they're coming off of a loss in the Super Bowl, and Travis Kelce does the podcast and very introspective, and the vibes aren't great with Travis Kelce, and there's a question about retirement and what would that mean, and he has to make his decision. But this has been kind of a saying that has been a theme of mine on Locked On Dolphins throughout the course of this season, talking about a number of different players. Like, the player has a right to make a decision on what he wants to do, but then the team subsequently, after that decision is made, has a right to make their own decision on what is in their best interest. And Kelce kind of was the inspiration for us to do this show, but there's more names than just Travis Kelce to talk about as it pertains to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Travis Kelce, 36 years old, obviously a down season for him. Vibes are definitely in a weird spot with him. Kyle, I think the best outcome for Kansas City is for Travis Kelce to retire.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very significant cap hit that they're staring at.
19.8.
19.8. And they can, if he retires or they release him, and of course, optically, you'd love for that to be a retirement, well, you get $17.2 million in cap savings for a very modest $2.5 million in dead cap. So I think the optimal path forward here would be for him to retire. And if not, then I think you have to release him. And you have to do that before March 14th to maximize your opportunities to get the full savings in the minimal dead cap. And I know that's a hard decision. He's been a top 2 tight end in this generation of football.
Yeah.
Has been a part of a lot of success, but it's hard to reconcile the season that he had and certainly didn't finish very well. And combine that with the age, some of the things he's communicated, that feels like it might be time, especially for Kansas City and the situation that they're in with, they've got about $11 million in cap space if the cap comes in at the 275 that some of the projections are coming at. But a point that you've made, and I'll get out of the way so you can talk about this, is they've only got 40 players under contract.
So they signed 11 players to futures contracts yesterday.
Okay, that's important.
So they're up to, over the cap has them at 50 players, but they're at 50 players. They need one more for top 51.
Okay.
And they have about $100,000 in cap space. So when they add that 51st player at, even if it's a minimum $800,000 salary,
zero,
they are going to be in a deficit against the projected salary cap. So they're going to have to start that process of transitioning and restructuring, or converting salary to bonuses and prorating it out, or
which they don't do, as we
right.
Yeah.
Their deficit for future years of cap is amongst the lowest teams in the league.
Where Philly was at $330 million in deferred salary.
Mm-hmm. I think there were 5 or 6 teams that have in excess of $100 million in salary cap obligations financed into future years for cash that's already been spent for the roster. So if you're Philadelphia, win a Super Bowl, right? And then nobody cares.
Who cares? Nobody cares.
And then the genius of Howie Roseman is they put all of their big dead cap figures in the first year after the TV deals expire, or like the first year that the league can opt out of their TV deals and renegotiate all their TV deals. So expectation of like next round of like boom in salary cap because of new television revenue is the year in which they've stashed all their current like explosions of void money for finance years. I'm not asking Kansas City to do that.
Right.
But to bring this back to Travis Kelce, the receiving yards have gone down in 3 consecutive seasons. The touchdowns have gone down in 3 consecutive seasons. The yards per catch has gone from 12.2 to 10.6 to 8.5 the last 3 years. This is a player that's going to turn 36 in October. The regressions, like, we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing that you could do, if you don't want to cut Travis Kelce and Travis Kelce decides he's not done playing football, I think the other thing that you could maybe do, and one of the other teams we're going to talk about today did this with a player last year, you could come to the table and sit down and say, what's your cash schedule look like this year? What are you owed to make? And what are we actually going to pay you? And like, because he's due $17.25 million in cash, whether that's in a lump sum payment or his base salary this year. You could technically renegotiate that dollar amount down and save more finances that way. So that's another pathway. If the outcomes you don't want to be, you either cut Travis Kelce or you have Travis Kelce retire. I think that's the other thing that you could potentially do with Travis Kelce individually as a career Kansas City Chiefs player.
If I could add a comment on a couple of more players that I think Kansas City's got to think about, they're Jawan Taylor and Joe Thuney. I think with Jawan Taylor, you're stuck. There's no opportunity to get out of this deal. I think you just have to live with it. He's your starting right tackle. Obviously, you've been able to win a couple of Super Bowls with him as your starting right tackle, and I think you have to continue that course because there's no real incentive to get out of that deal, and especially if you can't bring back Trey Smith, I don't think you want to redo like your entire right side when you're still trying to figure out your left tackle. As for Joe Thuney, Kyle, I think the best path forward is an extension. I don't think you want to move on from Thuney, but I also don't think you want to live in a world where he's got a $27 million cap hit this year. I think you'd love to extend him a year or two. He's 33. I think he's got a couple more good seasons left in him. Extend him out. That way you can maintain as much continuity as possible with the offensive line with your players that are good, knowing that you're probably going to need a left tackle and you're uncertain about the Trey Smith situation. Yeah,
I think that is the right answer there, where there's no void years on the back end of it. Now, you could technically restructure to just do a void year and then play it out for another year and see what it looks like. But that's not really their model of business. Right. So why would you expect that to be how they would choose to handle this, to say, oh, well, let's put 2 void years on the back end and restructure your $15 million base salary. And then it's $5 million this year that we would keep, and we could save $10 million in cap space and just put it out to 2026. And then if you continue to still play well, we'll sign you to a new contract extension. And that money doesn't accelerate all into 1 year, and you could still continue to be divided out. But I think that's the right names to invoke as it pertains to Kansas City and decisions that they'll have to make. Will be interesting to see from Patrick Mahomes' standpoint. what do you choose to do with he's got a $32 million roster bonus, right? But he's scheduled for a $66 million cap hit. We'll do something with some of that money, right?
That's the contract that they've been willing to mess with, and they should. That would be
right.
the one.
That's the one that you're willing to borrow against future years for.
I think it is fair to point out, though, Kansas City, they do business a little bit differently. They don't defer money. I don't want to put them in a category like we often do with the Bengals, but I think you can look at whether it's their locker room and some of the feedback that comes through on that NFLPA survey that kind of tells you that, like, there's not a lot of money being put into, like, optimizing the facilities for the players, how they choose not to defer money, that we have to look at Kansas City differently based on the habits that they've told us that they're not necessarily going to be, of course, not to the Eagles extreme, but, will they get to even middle of the pack with how they defer and look to maximize? I don't think so, but you never know how teams can evolve.
Yeah.
All right, Seattle, we're talking about Seahawks coming up on the other side of it. They got some veterans to look at. We'll discuss here in just a moment. Be sure to stick with us. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. So you post your job, and actually LinkedIn has a new feature that can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Can I finish with this on the Chiefs? We talked about their modus operandus, if you will.
Man, you've said that a few times. I don't even know what it means.
They're like their model of doing things.
You might as well just say a weird word like that,
Yeah, modus operandi. It makes me sound smart.
Yeah.
Do you know where Kansas City the last 5 years ranks in the NFL in cash spent?
I don't, but I know that you do because this is a Kyle Crabbs number that I'm pretty sure you study these lists every night before you go to sleep.
So 2019, Kansas City won the Super Bowl. They ranked 27th in the NFL in cash spent that year. In 2020, Kansas City went 14-2. They did not win the Super Bowl, but went 14-2. They ranked 25th in the NFL in cash spent in the year 2020. In 2021, Kansas City ranked all the way up at 17th in the NFL in cash spent.
Almost the top half.
This was where the Mahomes contract extension started to hit, where he got
moved the money up, right?
It was 2021. That was year 5 for him. He got $22.8 million in cash that year versus 10.5 as a rookie, 1.2 and 1.9 in 18 and 19. So, okay, so now you're into the Patrick Mahomes contract extension era. 2022, Kansas City checks in. They win the Super Bowl. They're 22nd in the NFL in cash spend with the Patrick Mahomes contract on their books. 2023, Kansas City wins the Super Bowl last year. They ranked 20th in the NFL in cash spent. So this entire time, they have not been in the top half of cash spent once. This is quarterback on rookie contract and just so happened to get generational player and what that allows you to do. Ironically enough, this past year, Kansas City was 9th in the NFL in cash spend. So the first time in the entirety of the Patrick Mahomes era of being on the Kansas City Chiefs roster, that Kansas City was in the top half of the league in cash spend, and it's because he received $45 million in cash this year to play for the Chiefs, which is still a bargain.
That's all Clark Hunt needs to hear, baby. I mean, I don't have to spend all that cash to win 3 Super Bowls.
Right.
We could be in the 20s.
I mean, I'm not doing anything wrong because although the results here are a little different than they are.
Right.
All right. So now that I hijacked half of segment 2, I think that's an important backdrop to have on the Kansas City conversation with names like Kelce and Tooney.
All right.
So
the 12s, right? That's what the They call them their looming field.
Good football team this past year. Not good trenches, but good football team. But some of the players that are have been staple players for Seattle is kind of where you start this conversation as a team that's projected to be about $13.5 million over the cap. They're over the allotted 51 for a top 51. So if they added a player, it would only be the difference between what that player's cap hit is versus the 51st player on the contract that is, or on the books at this point in time. So it's a good place for B to Seattle. This is the floor of where you're going to be in the deficit before you make some personnel decisions.
The lead name here is Tyler Lockett, who's been a great Seahawk for a long time. It's never easy to get to this point where you got to have these conversations, but we're here with Tyler Lockett, and the team has an opportunity. Like you mentioned, they're about $13 million over the projected salary cap.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can get you cap compliant. You're just going to cost you, moving on from Tyler Lockett, it's right at $17 million in cap savings. And you kind of have positioned yourself to be here with the drafting of Jackson Smith and Jigba, and had a good season last year. And I know there's some dynamics around DK Metcalf, but he's still here and he's in his prime. And, you know, you feel like you're probably at a point now where it's okay to do this. And you certainly feel like they want to get back to running the football, you would think, with the OC switch that they made.
Yep.
And so this just feels very logical, although, I mean, dude's an absolute legend in Seattle and should be revered forever, but it's kind of at that point.
Yeah. The challenge, I think, for Seattle and optimizing moving on from Tyler Lockett is he is in a contract year. So you're talking about 1 year's $17 million in cash owed to him if you were to try to move him on the market as a 33-year-old wide receiver.
I don't see it.
With the other names at wide receiver between free agency and the trade market that are already expected to be available. This feels like a cut out of necessity, just because I don't think you're going to get anybody that's biting at this dollar amount on a rental for a player in his mid-30s at wide receiver.
No, and I think, like you pointed out with Travis Kelce, this is definitely a regression. It's his lowest yardage output since 2017. It's the lowest touchdown
since 2017.
I'm sure there's yards per reception is kind of where it's been, but targets are way down. He's not a primary option for this passing game anymore. So it seems cut and dry. I'd be surprised if this isn't what they would do.
Yeah, I think you take the lumps with the close to $14 million in dead cap, but you clear the $17 million in salary off the books for him. That alone is going to get you salary cap compliant. But I think doing this should probably change the DK Metcalf. Like there's some trade buzz. I can't get there with just a player like DK, right? And obviously still a productive player. He's in a contract year, but has it's close to 6. I'm gonna do math. It's a little over $7 million in money that's been prorated out into void years for him already. So if you let him walk after the year in 2025, it's a $7 million dead cap hit. But if you extend him, it's only $2.37 million for the next 3 seasons, plus whatever new financial commitments you're making for him. So that there's a way to prevent acceleration of void money up into a dead cap hit in 2026. Plus, he would still theoretically be the featured player in your passing game. Or I think he still can be the featured player in your passing game.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if they're gonna get more into some play action down the field, build off the run game. I mean, this is the guy you want for that, to especially go with the slot player with JSN. And I mean, I think you can figure out that other guy at receiver if you want it when you're 11 personnel packages. I don't think that's a big climb.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to transition to Dre'Mont Jones.
Okay, because there's another couple names I want to make sure that we get to. So you want to do Dre'Mont now, and then we'll steal another name in on the other side of the break.
Yeah, Dre'Mont, I mean, he's not a starter for this team. Unique player just altogether with kind of who he is a very much a tweener. And they got a real opportunity here to get out of this deal as well. And I mean, they can release him and free up $11.6 million in cap. And I feel like with some of the young developing players that you have on the edge, in Hall and Mafe, and of course Byron Murphy is an interior guy, Leonard Williams, you got a lot there. You got a lot there at this group, and it feels like for a team that's up against the cap, this would be a great opportunity to move on. And Jones is a unique player to begin with, and not that I don't think Mike McDonald can get something out of him. I think he did come on down the stretch later in the season. I think this is a great opportunity to clear more cap.
And that is a player at age 28 season, $16 million in cash in a contract year. I think you may have a market there to move him
for a trade.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to get a day 2 pick that's really going to move the needle for you. But if you're going to lean into some of the youth and obviously year 2 in the system, and these big financial commitments have been made for him before he signed this contract in 2023 before Mike McDonald got there. That's the kind of player where I do think there's an intersection of cost at cash at $16 million with enough of a runway with a unique skill set that I would not be surprised if that's a player that does have some level of a market.
Yeah, now, probably more so than anyone yet.
You have to contrast that against this draft class, which is loaded with defensive talent that can play both inside and outside too.
Yeah.
So that'll hurt you there.
One thing with this overall offseason, there's a lot of teams with a lot of cap space. There's not necessarily a robust free agent market of players, which I think could make a trade for a player like this attractive. All right, Kyle's got more he's going to want to say on Seattle. Then we're going to talk a little Miami Dolphins here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with us. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
So we didn't really give this summary for Kansas City, but I think it's worth giving in Seattle here because we talked about their minus about $13.5 million is kind of the floor for where they should bottom out. Would you consider moving on from Noah Fant? I mean, he got a pretty robust 2-year contract last offseason from them, posted modest numbers, but he's on
for $9 million in savings?
For $9 million in savings versus a $13.5 million cap charge is what he's on the books for.
Yeah, I probably would, especially with how I think this offense is going to evolve, and what we've learned about this tight end class looks pretty strong. That feels like a good one to consider.
So I mean, and stats aren't everything, but you are talking about those 48 catches for 500 yards and 1 touchdown last year.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're necessarily getting great bang for your buck. Now, maybe moving on from Lockett changes the target distribution, and maybe they feel comfortable with that. But it was at least another name I wanted to evoke where if you traded Dre'Mont Jones and you cut Tyler Lockett and Noah Fant, you've gone up to $24 million in operating cap.
Yeah. Uchenna and Nwosu is probably another name. Unfortunately, just injuries lately have really taken away, but there's another opportunity to get $8.3 million with a release of him.
Yeah. So and you mentioned the youth that they have there, and that they might be a prime spot, depending on what they do in free agency on the offensive line, to add. Like I think Jalen Walker's like the tailor-made.
Oh gosh,
Mike McDonald edge rusher, right?
Yeah.
So,
oh gosh, yeah, that'd be perfect.
So they'll have options, and they will not need to make some of these decisions before they get to the draft, which will allow them to strategically be cap compliant. The Dolphins do not have the same luxury, though, where they are currently projected. Well, it's about the same amount as Seattle. It's about they need to add 2 more names to get to a top 51, and that's going to put them about $13 million in a deficit. There's 3 big names here for Miami, and they're a team that's facing some pressure to win based off the regression that they had this year. But it's Bradley Chubb, it's Tyreek Hill, it's Terron Armstead. And I'll give you kind of what my school of thought was coming into the offseason, and it has since changed. But you're sitting here looking at those big 3 contracts. Those are the second, third, and fourth largest cap charges that the Dolphins are scheduled to carry it. Chubb is at 28.6. You've got Tyreek Hill at 27.6, and you've got Terron Armstead at 22.8. And with a team that has a lot of expiring contracts and a lot of snaps that is set to hit free agency, the school of thought coming into the offseason was, well, if you can navigate some of these and avoid opening up additional holes on your roster, it's probably beneficial to you to do a restructure and then take a later exit ramp on these contracts. But then I sat down and looked at it, Joe, and you're looking at, if you moved on from those 3 players and they have a bunch of other levers that they can pull elsewhere to have effectively twice as much operating cap for the first wave of free agency as what they put themselves at last year, without saving really more than $5 million from moving on from any of those 3 players, they could open up an additional $103 million in cap space for 2026. It's the contrast of that versus the pressure to win versus the cultural issue with a team captain who quit on his team just after halftime and chose not to play the second half of the 17th game of the season, and an offensive tackle who posted his highest snap count in his age 34 season since 2019, and an edge rusher who you got 0 snaps from last year altogether. Really fascinating trio of players with complex situations. But against that backdrop of, you can completely entirely reset your books if you moved on from those 3 players. You're talking $100 million in cap space for 2026.
I think they should absolutely do that. And those are older guys that are obviously aging as well. I think there's some really common sense moves for Miami. I know you're aware of these, but like, you do a basic conversion for Zach Sealer, that's 5.4. Austin Jackson, that's 8.
I wouldn't be surprised if he requires a renegotiation.
Well, yeah, he's one of the most valuable contracts in football. He's back-to-back double-digit seasons. Is he like 11 per?
Yeah, and he's had double-digit sacks the last 2 years. Like,
right. So you do something there, and if it's an extension or a conversion, there's probably cap savings to be had. Yes. Austin Jackson for 8, Jordan Brooks for 5.3, Aaron Brewer for 4.7, and release Mostert for 3.1 in savings. Like,
and I put Durham Smythe in that bucket too. You could save
for the release
more. Yeah, you could save another $2 million there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of common sense levers to pull here. In addition to, those are big time names, but there's always the injury gamble with Armstead. Chubb, I know that there was a lot given up to get him, but like 29, a lot of injuries. There's probably his best football is behind him. You don't have to sit there.
And you already got nothing for him last year. So it's not like you're losing a role that you had on the roster last year.
Right. Yeah, it'd have been great to see, of course, a healthy Chubb and Phillips with Coach Weaver and everything that.
And Chop Robinson.
Dude,
right?
Yeah,
like, what an exciting
It'd have been
trio.
nasty. It'd have been nasty. But it didn't happen. I think that's common sense to me.
But you could, the argument being, if you don't want to open another hole on your roster, you could restructure Bradley Chubb and save $13.7 million.
And what's the consequence of that? Is you're sticking with it.
You're bearing that money into future years, and now you would lose money to try to move on as a pre-June 1st cut in 2026. Versus if you moved on from Chubb and any of these departures that I would have for Miami, I am taking all of the cap hit up front because there's a long-term cap health discussion with this team that is more extreme than the other teams. Because I think they're 8th in prorated money into future years. It's close to $70 million in void years that they have. So Bradley Chubb, you could move on from pre-June 1st, either if you can get something for him, trade him, because he's owed $19.4 million in cash in each of the next 2 seasons, non-guaranteed. Maybe you get a late round pick. You'd save $1.2 million. So I would rather have that than not get any savings until June 1st and then still take dead money in 2026 anyway.
Kyle, is the foil for Miami that's challenging this offseason? I think that there's a lot of like very healthy things that they can do.
Mm-hmm.
How do they balance that against, hey, anytime that the owner comes out and makes has to release a statement that your GM and head coach are continuing, it says that they're on that, look, they're the hot seats there.
Yep.
How do you thread that needle between long-term health versus, boy, you better show something this year to stick around?
So this is where the Dolphins' power structure, I think, comes into play. Because it is not just Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel. And those are the two players in this power game, if you will, that are feeling pressure because, there's the roster had fatal flaws with the backup quarterback situation and the offensive guard decision. And Mike McDaniel fed into that decision as far as their offensive line ideology, which you and I talked about. There's some things that I had some conversations with people around the team like last summer, and you were like, ooh, that's an interesting way to think about that. And it was one of the things that blew up and bit him in the rear end this year. Brandon Shore is the other name to know here. Brandon Shore is the one who's responsible for writing out all of the details and all the contracts. Brandon Shore's official title is Senior Vice President of Football and Business Administration for the Dolphins. He's the checks and balances type personality that exists here, where one of the big holdups in getting a Tua Tagovailoa contract done was not the dollars. It was the structure of the contract that Brandon Shore was responsible for having his hands on and structuring the dollars in a way that the team felt comfortable with all of the pivots and the exit strategies. And he only gets 2024 and 2025 salaries fully guaranteed. And then on the 5th day of the league calendar year in 2025, his 2026 salary becomes fully guaranteed, but it's guaranteed for injury. So that role within this and the feedback that he gives as a person who's been generally applauded at every intersection for the job that he does within the structuring of contracts and exit ramps and flexibility within contracts, I think is the checks and balances that Miami needs to make sure that we don't just max restructure everybody and say, well, we need to win in 2025, so we're going to keep Tyreek Hill and we're going to max restructure Terron Armstead, we're going to max restructure Bradley Chubb, and we're going to restructure Tua Tagovailoa's contract, which he's got $25 million in base salary that they can use as a slush fund if they need it. But I wouldn't touch it this year based off the injury concerns with him as a player. And that's $39 million cap hit. So I think that's the part for Miami that you can kind of bury in the back of your head to know there's another person in the feedback loop that's not just in the, oh my God, we got to win this year, we're out.
That's good. I think that's healthy.
So Miami can also save $4.25 million by moving on from Terron Armstead as pre-June 1st. He's another player that has to do the Travis Kelce thing and decide if he's going to play. There's a retirement conversation there. But I would not pocket him and do the thing the Chargers did with Corey Linsley and restructure his contract down to minimum salary and carry him until June 2nd to process his retirement so you could split the dead cap across 2 years.
Yeah, I don't do that.
The 2026 vacancy and then still getting cap savings that you can spend in the first window. Both the Bradley Chubb and the Terron Armstead contracts. Now it's $5.5 million. It's not a ton, but you can get a good player in a contract for $5.5 million in cap space.
Right.
So for me, I would do that and then take what would be equal to $52 million in cap savings in 2026. But we'll see what they do when they are under pressure to win. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On NFL Scouting. I'm Kyle Crabbs. He's Joe Marino. We appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We are back tomorrow with Takes on Takes.